is it still working? Yeah, I think it's yeah. Hello, WANS fans. In the pub. This episode, this is coming live from the Half Moon pub in Deepest Darkest Devon. So I hope it's working. We're trying out LP's new broadcast device. LP's here with me. Amanda, how are you doing?
I'm good, Si, and hi, WANS fans. Thanks for joining us again. This time in the pub. It's a nice place to do it, isn't it, Si?
It is, and I hope that's your first cider.
It is. I'm taking it easy, So I want to be able to educate and inform kind of reliably, and before I get a little bit too excited, as it were.
Good. And ciders, your tipple, are very, very authentic.
Well, as a Devon lad through and through, then yeah, that would be my go-to choice, as it were.
So I thought we'd try something a little different this episode. We've come here to the Half Moon pub to try something new, which is Commander LP's Nobel Endeavours. And this is kind of like the creme de la creme of scientists and anyone like from the human species since the dawn of time who have made incredible scientific breakthroughs and discoveries that have pushed forward and made us who we are today. Well, that's a good or a bad thing. Anyway, Commander LP, what do you think? You've got a big long list of people that keeps growing, but you're going to kick off this week with the first person, the first human, who you're going to give your Nobel Endeavours to. Who's that going to be?
Simon, this week I'd like to talk about Galileo Galilei.
Galileo Galilei. Okay, Commander LP, as your student, treat me as you always do, as an idiot. Who was Galileo?
Galileo was an Italian natural philosopher, astronomer, and mathematician. Okay, born in 1564 near Pisa. When I use the term natural philosopher, that was kind of, in the Renaissance, that's what they kind of called science, really. So yeah, his father was a musician, well-renowned musician as well. So had a bit of money, and Galileo kind of grew up in a house where his dad would teach him how to tune instruments and do little experiments with how you pluck a string and you tighten it, and that got obviously Galileo's mind thinking in a scientific way from a pretty young age, I'd suggest.
All right, so that's kiddie Galileo. Let's get him out of the way. What about natural philosopher Galileo? When did he begin to take shape?
Well, I suppose once he kind of grew from a child into a young man, he actually went to study at the University of Pisa, but actually started with the study of medicine. That was kind of, I think that's kind of what his father wanted. But whilst he was at the university, he was surrounded by people that would talk about philosophy and early physics and mathematics, and became very sort of interested in that, would actually probably duck out of his medicine classes and go and sit and learn about geometry or something, And it was I think basically he made that switch into philosophy and mathematics and studied for a few years, and obviously became so good at it by 1589 he was actually made the professor of mathematics at Pisa before he moved to another university, Padua, just a couple of years later. So from a young age, always fascinated, but it became very apparent shortly after he joined university that philosophy and mathematics was his one sort of true and first love, really.
And did he have a beard by this point?
I'm not quite sure when he developed his beard, I mean, what would he have been? Sort of like, 30-ish, so at that time?
Is that like a precondition of a natural philosopher, scientist in those days? A beard? Was it just...
You have to have a beard?
Yeah. Just thinking about all the philosophers, scientists, coming from that time, and I'm thinking beards. I'm sure there's people without beards, but yeah.
So yeah, but I mean, his so during his time at Padua, I think he was there to about 1610. He worked on loads of experiments from mechanics. He was obsessed with the motion of pendulums, and also the speed at which different objects fall. Now, one of his heroes was Aristotle, and he took a lot from Aristotle because Aristotle kind of, some people would say, is almost like the grandfather of the thoughts behind the scientific method. This idea that you should make a sort of a prediction, experiment, and if the results of that experiment support your prediction, then you can turn that into a proper accepted theory. And it was actually, but because of the kind of guy Galileo was, from a relatively early age, he was never interested in just sort of accepting things as they were. He always wanted to prove to himself before he would actually kind of accept that, either a theory that somebody was already in place or some conventional wisdom was sound. He'd want to go and do that experiment and prove to himself. And often, obviously, because a lot of the theories that were around at that time were actually incomplete or incorrect, he proved a lot of things, a lot of people wrong, including Aristotle himself, one of his heroes. Aristotle sort of predicted that.
Oh God! Imagine that.
Yeah, from a young age, and that caused kind of, let's say, some ructions even within the academic world, because if you're going to go and say Aristotle was wrong, at that time, you were a pretty brave guy. But essentially, Aristotle predicted that if you had two objects, an object with a lower mass and an object with a greater mass, and drop those objects, that the object with a greater mass would essentially reach a greater velocity before it hit the ground. If you disregard,
which is obviously true. Which is obviously true, right?
No, not at all. No, absolutely not. No objects. If you put objects in a vacuum, so there's no air resistance, whether you dropped a feather or you dropped a bowling ball, they would actually drop at the same rate. The only thing that really affects their falling rate, sort of on Earth as we understand it, is that air resistance. But yeah, you can do this experiment yourself, Simon. If you grab sort of like a penny coin and you grab like a kilogram weight and you drop them, they will both hit the ground at the same time. And Galileo proved this because he climbed up to the top of the Tower of Pisa with a load of crowd of people watching him, and he dropped two objects, a lighter object and a heavier object, off of the Tower of Pisa, and they both hit the ground at the same time. So that was his, probably him really finding his feet and being prepared to experiment to actually really prove or disprove previous theories, which was that was his that sort of hopefully paints a bit of a picture of who Galileo really was.
I'm actually going to Italy soon, so I might take a couple of bricks with me to go to Pisa, and give that a go.
Maybe I'd suggest that you don't do that, or you at least speak to some people beforehand. I'm not sure whether the security.
I've got a theory that I need to prove or disprove. So yeah, it'll get me to all right. And then this got into a lot of trouble at this time, like you were saying.
Yes.
For being too smart.
Yeah, rocking the boat as it were. But again, one of the reasons he's one of my heroes, Simon. This idea that anybody can make statements and can say things, but how do you quantify that? And it's being able to back it up with not just a theory, but doing some kind of experimentation to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that what he's suggesting is correct and accurate. It'd almost be good if in today's world some people would take some more cues from Galileo's kind of sort of thought process, I think. So
he's still around today, isn't he? I mean, he's still around in, he's probably one of the most well-known famous scientists of our human existence. I think if you just say Galileo to most people, they'd have heard the word at least, and the sound at least. But most people you'd hope would know that he is a scientist. But what would be his? If I was to ask you, what's the biggest thing he's done then? This Galileo fellow. What would you tell me?
Well, he really, I suppose he really found his fame after the invention of the telescope. So he heard about this invention. It came from Holland in, I think it was about the 1610, around the time I think he ended up leaving the Padua University. And he'd heard that these Dutch guys had come up with this idea of using kind of eyeglasses, convex and concave lenses, and put them in a tube, and then you could like basically bring objects further away, closer to your eye. And he built his own. Never saw a telescope working, but he just decided, well, you know, I know the theory, I'm going to build my own. And apparently built it a lot better than the Dutch version, and just started pointing it at the sky. And again, disproving all sorts of things that people had previously held dear. So one of the first things he did was point it at the moon, where he saw, you know, the mountains and the valleys and the surface of the moon. Again, Aristotle said that, you know, celestial bodies and were kind of these perfect spheres, and that has stood the test of time for thousands of years. There's Galileo going, well, I'm afraid it's not, look, because if you look closely with my telescope, I can tell you that, you know, the moon is far from flat. He used his telescope to point at the sun, and then projected the image of the sun onto a piece of paper, something that you can do now, and it's often never, I should say to all listeners, never look directly at the sun, either with your eyes through binoculars or a telescope. You will go blind. You can project the image, and he was one of the first people to. Well, he was the first person to observe sunspots. He also pointed it at Venus and realised that Venus wasn't just a bright star; that it had phases, because you see it kind of at an angle. So you see it's kind of like a crescent shape, but depending on where it is around the sun, depends on sort of how much of the face of Venus you see. And of course, probably most famously, he discovered the 4 largest moons of Jupiter: Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. You know, we'd never, up until that point, seen like a moon of another body other than our own moon. So, and this essentially made him so famous. He was made court mathematician in Florence, you know, which was one of the biggest, most, you know, richest cities in all of Europe at that point. So he was really on the ascendancy. You know, became quite a kind of scientific superstar, not just as we know him now, but even back then. So yeah.
Absolutely incredible. Like, I mean, imagine like achieving just like a hundredth of that in your lifetime. It's incredible. I mean, did he have a family, or he just have to spend so much time doing this in your life? You just have to dedicate your complete life to it. You can't have time for other people, surely.
yeah. No, I believe he had a couple of romantic involvements. I don't think he ever got married, but I believe he had a few children, kind of, and they were kind of termed illegitimate because they were out of wedlock. I think he had 2 daughters that ended up going to a convent, and he had some son. But yeah, I'm not 100% familiar with that. And again, because
I'm going to prod that a little bit further, because he's having his cake and eating it by the sounds of it there.
So yeah, but obviously, but from that, you know, then like he really started to get himself into a bit of trouble, because in 1614 he was accused of heresy for supporting the Copernican theory that the sun is at the center of the universe, which was at odds with the accepted wisdom at the time. So yes, so I don't know if you know Nicholas Copernicus. He was sort of, I suppose he died, I think, a couple of decades before Galileo was born, but he was sort of the first person to propose that the Earth was not the centre of the universe. He had this idea that the sun was the centre of the universe. I mean, the sun isn't the centre of the universe, but it's a more accurate description of how things actually are, because obviously the Earth travels around the sun. And Galileo picked this idea up and really kind of, although again, he wanted to do his experiments to kind of prove this. He just really wanted to know. Well, there's this idea that everything goes around the Earth, and there's also this idea that maybe the Earth goes around the sun. And he worked on this, and again, he started prodding some things. Then some people in the Vatican didn't like it. So he, I think, a couple of years later, he was forbidden by the church from teaching or advocating any of those kind of theories. It's like, you can't talk about that. You just can't. And of course, being Galileo, but he's like, well, But the thing is, right? I've done some experiments, and it just you're wrong. So again, and then I think it was a couple of decades later, he actually got so cocky, he wrote a book called "The Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems," which he had published. And essentially, it was written in the form of like a discussion between two men, both for and against the Copernican theory of the sun being at the center of the solar system, universe as it was back then, and not. And he got summoned to the Roman Inquisition, and they weren't happy. The Pope was a very angry man. Because I think he actually mentions the Pope in this book as one of the supporters of the kind of Earth at the center of the universe kind of theory. And he kind of, in his defense, he was kind of like saying, look, I'm not saying either is right or wrong. I'm just laying out there are these two potential options, and the reader can kind of make their decision. But I think when you read it, you could definitely see he was leaning more on the fact that, the Earth is the center of the universe. So he was basically then sentenced to life in prison. But they kind of, because he had some, mates in high places and his previous fame, they kind of like reduced it to house arrest. So he was basically spent the rest of his life under house arrest in a place called Arcetri, which is south of Florence. It was his lovely villa, so I mean it could have been worse. And then he lived out his life, still working on kind of, I think it was in he wrote a book in 1638, about the laws of motion and the principles of mechanics, and this was just a couple of years before he died. I should say he did suffer quite a bit of bad health through his life as well. He actually went blind at the end of his life, but it never stopped his kind of obsession with natural philosophy and mathematics and everything else. So he was an amazing guy. So
what an achievement! It's just absolutely incredible. What would you say what would you say your kind of like main reason is for putting Galileo as your first Nobel Endeavour?
I think it's like I might have mentioned a bit earlier. It's just this idea that he was willing to lay, like, I won't say almost his life, but essentially to go out there and go, you lot are wrong, okay? And here is some verifiable evidence to prove that you are wrong, And like he would know that, and he understood the science. He really understood the scientific method. Again, he probably was one of the first people. You had Aristotle and his ideas about experimentation, but Galileo kind of took it to the next level. It's like, I'm not going to believe anything unless it can be, you can create a theory, you can go and test it, and then based on the results of that test, decide whether that theory is sound or not. And that was an amazing thing. I think it was sad that he was, after the Inquisition period, he was actually forced to retract all of his work about the Copernican theory. Most of his books that
did he like do like a wink at the end of it? How he did that, like.
I don't know.
That's wrong as well. That one, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, but it was, God,
like, that must have been so frustrating for him, though. Can you imagine that, all that, and he just like having to say, oh, it must have been the most frustrating thing. Feel for the guy.
Definitely, and I mean, it was a shame that the book that I mentioned, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, it was burned. Any copies of it were essentially, taken from the publisher. It was all ripped up. I believe a few copies survived because he had them sent to his mate Johannes Kepler, who was in more Northern Europe. And in Northern Europe, we were a little bit more kind of, not so much into burning witches through heresy kind of thing, and people were a little bit more open-minded to this. And, bringing in Johannes Kepler quickly, and I know we're here to talk about Galileo. Again, he was somebody that kind of, spent a bit of time in dialogue with Galileo via written letters, and he again understood and very much was behind the Copernican theory that the Earth goes around the sun. But what he was famous for was the fact that, whereas a lot of people thought that the motions of the planets were circular, they're actually elliptical, and it was Johannes Kepler that worked that out. And that's why before then it was difficult to predict where planets were going to move in the sky, because when you ran the mathematics with them moving in circles, it just didn't work. And then Johannes Kepler went, well, what happens if they go in ellipses or oval shapes essentially, and then suddenly the maths works. So yeah, and this is the thing. You've got Copernicus, then you've got Galileo, then you've got Kepler. This is the great thing of these great minds. They just build and build and build the knowledge. But yeah, for me, Galileo, yeah, when it comes to 16th century sort of scientist, then yeah, he's the one for me. So.
Awesome. Well, you've hardly touched your point there. You've talked so much, Commander LP. But I have pretty much finished mine, as you'll see. So I'm going to go to the bar. I don't think you want another pint yet. So a bag of crisps or something like that?
Yeah. I always quite like a salt and vinegar, if that's okay.
No problem. Yeah, well, thanks for that. Great to know about Galileo and how important he is to the human evolution, and also to you, Commander LP, which is what this is all about, isn't it?
Thank you very much, Si. It's a pleasure to be able to share sort of my love of these scientific greats, and I can't wait to do another Nobel Endeavour with you.
Can't wait to see who's next. I hope the broadcast unit here works okay. It's the first time we've used it, so apologies if there's any cut out. Not too rowdy in the bar, in the club, as you can probably hear. No trouble like they wanted the other night, Commander. But we'll not talk about that. Yeah, I'm off to the bar, and yeah, thanks for that, LP, and thanks fans for listening. See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.